Imagine stepping into this freezing cave, maybe 20 degrees below 0 Celsius. You ask for the toilet, and they just laugh and point outside to the ice.
Right.
Or picture being offered bread, but it's sand-kneaded bread, so gritty, your teeth actually screech when you bite it.
Wow. Not exactly fine dining.
Definitely not. And these aren't scenes from some survival show, right? They're actual glimpses into what it was like engaging with Osama bin Laden.
It makes you wonder, what does it really take to understand something like Al-Qaeda, beyond the news headlines?
Exactly. So today we're doing a deep dive based on a pretty unique source. Abdel Bari Atwan's The Secret History of Al-Qaeda from 2006.
And Atwan's perspective is crucial here. He's a veteran journalist who had, incredible access.
Unparalleled access, really, including a personal interview with bin Laden himself back in '96 in Tora Bora.
So our mission today is what? To pull out the key insight.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
We want to extract the most important insights from this firsthand account. We'll get into Al-Qaeda's origins, its evolution, which is quite surprising, its ideology, its strategies.
Things like cyber-jihad, the human bomb phenomenon.
Right. And also how big global events, especially the Iraq War, really changed the game for them.
And just to be clear for everyone listening, this isn't about taking sides.
Absolutely not. It's about looking impartially at the ideas and realities presented in Atwan's book.
Yeah.
Trying to give you a clearer, more informed perspective on, well, a really complex subject.
Okay. So where do we start? The journey itself.
Let's do that. Okay, so let's unpack this. Imagine getting that invitation. Interview the world's most wanted man. That's what happened to Atwan in '96.
It sounds unbelievable.
Right. And the journey to Tora Bora, it sounds like it was designed to, reinforce bin Laden's mystique.
How so?
Well, Atwan described being skeptical at first, then the blindfolded travel. He even had to wear an Afghan costume. He mentioned feeling really self-conscious in the turban, especially crossing the Khyber Pass.
Wow. And who were his escorts?
Unarmed Taliban fighters. And apparently they found his disguise kind of amusing.
Unarmed. That's interesting.
Yeah. And the conditions were just incredibly primitive. Unidentifiable broth for meals, vehicles constantly breaking down. It all just highlights the intense secrecy around bin Laden.
It really does. The sheer audacity, the personal risk for Atwan, that level of access was almost unheard of.
Totally.
It just paints such a different picture from, a standard press interview, shows the length they went to stay hidden. So when he finally met bin Laden, what was he like? Did the reality match the image?
Well, that's what's fascinating. Some details were really surprising. His personal demeanor, his living conditions.
Like what?
Despite being from this incredibly wealthy family, he lived this really simple, austere life. Atwan talks about sleeping on a grimy mattress, laid over crates of hand grenades.
Crates of grenades? Seriously?
Yeah. Kalashnikovs hanging nearby, no running water, no electricity. And apparently, bin Laden preferred that gritty sand-kneaded bread to proper meals.
Huh. But what about his personality?
Atwan noted he had this surprising familiarity, even charisma. He observed his deep religious faith, how emotional bin Laden got talking about fallen fighters. He made this comment that his wealth wasn't his, it was for the Ummah, the global Muslim community. He said, the Ummah is connected like an electric current.
That's a powerful image.
And there was this moment, a loud noise outside sounded like an attack, like a drill. But bin Laden didn't even flinch, completely unperturbed.
Wow.
And he made this really unforgettable statement. We hope to reach ignition point in the not-too-distant future.
Ignition point. That phrase really sticks out. It hints at this deep conviction, a long-term strategy, even back then.
Yeah.
It does make you ask, though, how does someone from such privilege embrace this incredibly harsh, dangerous life?
Especially when, as Atwan also saw, bin Laden's sons were playing Nintendo at a safe house in Jalalabad.
Right. That contrast is jarring, isn't it? Radicalism and, well, Nintendo. How does seeing him through Atwan's eyes challenge the common perceptions we might have?
It certainly complicates the picture. And to understand Al-Qaeda properly, we really need to dig into their interpretation of Islam and jihad.
Okay.
So the source explains that jihad, in the sense of combat, has these two main forms. First, there's offensive jihad. That's considered fard kifaya.
Which means, like, a communal duty, optional if enough others are doing it.
Exactly. A communal duty, optional for individuals if the community is handling it. But then there's defensive jihad, and that's classified as Fard ain.
Okay, and fard ain means?
An individual obligation, mandatory for every single Muslim if their land is seen as being occupied.
And that distinction is absolutely crucial, isn't it? Because al-Qaeda consistently frames its actions as defensive jihad.
Precisely. Which makes it, in their view, a personal religious duty for every Muslim. It's a really powerful justification.
It provides that theological imperative.
Right. And then there are the intellectual roots. We need to talk about the key influencers.
Sure. Who are the main figures shaping this ideology?
Well, first, Abdullah Azzam. He was bin Laden's early mentor, big influence.
What was his main message?
He really emphasized liberating Muslim lands from foreign occupation. And he was key in mobilizing the Afghan Arabs, foreign fighters coming to Afghanistan.
As Azzam. Who else?
Then there's Sayyid Qutb, an Egyptian thinker. He studied in the U.S., actually, but came back totally disillusioned with Western liberalism.
Ah, Qutb. His writings, like milestones, became huge for political Islam. Right?
Exactly, kind of a manifesto.
Yeah.
He had that famous quote, something like, "The index finger that testifies to God's oneness refuses to seek a pardon from a tyrant." Said it while imprisoned.
Powerful stuff. Defiant.
Definitely. And finally, Ayman al-Zawahiri, bin Laden's deputy.
Zawahiri pushed for taking the fight global, didn't he?
Yeah. He argued for globalizing jihad, specifically targeting all Americans and all Jews with the aim to, quote, drive them crazy.
So you have these different streams. Azzam's focus on occupation, Qutb's anti-Western ideology, Zawahiri's global ambition.
And they all get synthesized, along with earlier Islamic ideas and Salafi beliefs.
Salafism being that fundamentalist strand wanting to return to the pure Islam of the first generations.
Right. It all gets combined to form al-Qaeda's specific, very radical interpretation, which then paved the way for their global goals.
It's fascinating how these ideas, even radical ones, spread and gain traction. Understanding these intellectual roots seems so vital, doesn't it, to grasp the movement itself?
Absolutely. Now, let's shift to something the source really delves into, something often misunderstood, the phenomena of what the West calls suicide bombers.
Okay, a tough topic.
Yeah. But al-Qaeda and its sympathizers don't use that term. They call them istishhadi, martyrs, literally witnesses to the faith.
And the core belief there is
that many jihadis are actually more interested in dying than living. Martyrdom is seen as this guarantee of an instant place in heaven, plus a way to dramatically advance the cause. Bin Laden himself believed this.
It's a mindset that's hard for many to comprehend. But are there historical precedents for this kind of self-sacrifice in warfare?
The source points out there are. It mentions Samson in the Bible destroying the Philistine temple. The Jewish Sicarii and Zealots fighting the Romans. Even the Ismaili assassins. That's where the word assassin comes from.
Right, assassin.
Yeah. And more recently, you have the Japanese kamikaze pilots in World War II.
And Iran's human waves in the Iran-Iraq War, young martyrs.
Exactly. But it's crucial to add, this is highly debated within Islam itself.
How so?
Well, many prominent Muslim scholars argue these acts are suicide, plain and simple, and therefore forbidden, haram.
But others disagree.
Others, like Azzam Tamimi mentioned in the source, see them as legitimate acts of self-sacrifice, but only within the context of defensive jihad. So there's no single Islamic view.
That's a really important nuance. And what about the people who carry out these attacks? The source challenges the stereotypes, right?
Massively. The media often paints them as, uneducated, poor, desperate losers.
But the reality is different.
According to Atwan's research, yes. Often, they're better educated and less impoverished than the average person in their country.
Really? Like how much better educated?
Over half had post-secondary education. Nearly 80% were from working or middle-class families.
That completely upends the common image.
It does. The source talks about the sanctions generation in Iraq, for example. Young people who grew up under really harsh conditions may be more exposed to religious ideas and became more susceptible to jihadi recruitment.
So it suggests political motivations like anger over occupation, humiliation, a desire for revenge are just as important, maybe even more so than just religious fervor alone.
Exactly. It seems life and death just take on different relative values in these intense conflict zones.
Which helps us understand maybe the complex mix of reasons driving someone to such an extreme act. It could be personal revenge, a sense of collective injustice, a lot of factors.
And it's not just men. The source discusses the istishhadiyya, the female martyr.
Right. Why is she seen as such a potent weapon?
Well, Partly strategic, she might be less likely to be suspected or searched, allowing her to get closer to a target.
Makes sense.
But also huge propaganda value. Though again, there's theological debate within Islam about women fighting in jihad.
Are there specific examples mentioned?
Yes, Wafa Idris, the first Palestinian female suicide bomber. Hanadi Jaradat, a lawyer who apparently acted to avenge her brother and cousin. And the source mentions the Chechen Black Widows too.
So these are complex human stories behind the headlines.
Definitely. So, okay, bringing this together, what does it tell us about al-Qaeda's strategy? How did it operate and adapt?
Well, initially the structure seems to have been more centralized, more top-down.
Right, but it changed.
Significantly. The source talks about its horizontal expansion, basically small independent groups popping up, subscribing to the ideology, but operating pretty autonomously.
With little direct command from the core leadership.
Exactly.
Right.
Which, makes the whole network much more resilient, harder to track, harder to dismantle, a big strategic plus for them.
And then came Iraq, the U.S. invasion in 2003.
Ah, yes. The source calls this a historical irony, doesn't it?
It does. Atwan argues the invasion actually revived al-Qaeda's flagging fortunes.
How? By turning Iraq into a magnet.
Pretty much. A breeding ground, a mecca for terrorists, as the book puts it. Suddenly, they had a safe haven, a training ground, and a huge influx of new recruits, both foreign and Iraqi.
A massive unintended consequence.
Hugely unintended. And central to this new phase in Iraq was one particular figure, Abu Musab al-Zarqawi.
Zarqawi. He became the leader of al-Qaeda in Iraq, right? Al-Qaeda in the land of the two rivers.
That's him. And the source gives some, frankly, jarring details about his background. Yeah. Before he became this radical leader.
He was something else entirely.
Yeah. Described as a street thug. Criminal record included drinking, tattoos, jail time for knife attacks, shoplifting, drug dealing, even accused of rape at one point.
Wow. That's quite a transformation. How does someone go from that to a radical Islamist emir?
The source suggests the radicalization really happened during his time in prison. It's kind of a stark example of how those environments can forge extremism.
And he embraced this new identity. He had that nickname, Al-Gharib.
The stranger, yeah. Reflects his chosen path. And his alliance with bin Laden, it brought this new, much more ruthless face to al-Qaeda.
More ruthless how?
Particularly his willingness to hit soft targets. Civilians, including Shia Muslims, which apparently caused a lot of debate even within al-Qaeda initially. They weren't all on board with that.
It shows a real pragmatism, maybe a shift in tactics within the movement. And the source mentions leaflets identifying Iraqi suicide bombers by their hometowns.
Yeah, showing this rise of local recruits, not just foreign fighters.
The whole Zarqawi story, it just makes you think how major geopolitical events can backfire so spectacularly, turning a fading enemy into a much bigger threat.
Absolutely. Now let's switch gears slightly. We've talked about ideology and violence, but al-Qaeda also fought on other fronts, like the economy.
Right, the economic warfare aspect.
Bin Laden himself pointed this out. He claimed 9/11 cost al-Qaeda maybe $500,000.
But caused an estimated $1 trillion in damage to the U.S. economy.
Exactly. A huge return on investment from his perspective.
Yeah.
And the source talks about the terror premium on oil prices, attacks on pipelines driving costs up.
And bin Laden actually called for oil to hit $100 a barrel, didn't he? Recognizing that vulnerability.
He did. It was a deliberate strategy.
If you connect that to broader historical theories, it actually aligns pretty well with Paul Kennedy's ideas in The Rise and Fall of the Growing Powers.
How so?
Kennedy argues empires often decline due to things like spiraling internal security costs, military overreach, and economic competition. Al-Qaeda seemed to be deliberately trying to accelerate those pressures on the U.S.
And wasn't Zawahiri aware of Kennedy's work?
Explicitly. The source says Zawahiri actually cited Kennedy's book as a reference for their strategy.
Wow. That's quite something. A jihadi leader using Western historical analysis to plan.
It really makes you think, doesn't it? How a group like Al-Qaeda, seemingly low-tech in some ways, could so effectively exploit modern economic systems. What does that mean for future conflicts?
It's a sobering thought. And they weren't just hitting economic targets. They were also operating online in the digital realm. Cyber-jihad.
Yeah, that's another fascinating part. The Madrid train bombings in 2004.
Right. At Wan's newspaper, Al-Quds Al-Arabi, they were the ones who broke the story that al-Qaeda claimed responsibility via email.
And that claim, that email, contributed to the Spanish government falling in the election just days later. Huge political impact from a digital message.
It showed the power of the internet as a weapon.
And al-Qaeda really leveraged it, did they? It wasn't just for sending claims. It was communication, recruitment, training, psychological warfare, a whole toolkit.
How did they get so good at it?
Well, the source points to an unexpected strength in the Arab world for cryptography and secrecy, combined with growing digital literacy. They got very clever.
Clever in what ways?
Using things like the City of Darkness, an underground network to bypass Saudi internet censorship. Using one-time email accounts, like the mafia does. Setting up short-life websites that disappeared quickly. Using proxy servers to hide their location. Even using anonymous pay-as-you-go credit cards.
How did those work?
You'd buy a voucher, email the reference number, and charge the card. They even set them up under fake names like a donkey in the Far East.
That's creative in a disturbing way.
Definitely. And it wasn't just communication. They used the internet for actual training.
Right, you mentioned that earlier, online courses.
Exactly. The source names, online magazines, or courses like Al-Batar and Thurwat al-Sanam. They had instructions on making suicide bomb belts, poisons, even detailed advice on targeting European cities.
So the internet became a virtual training camp and command center.
Pretty much. Shows incredible adaptation to modern tech.
Okay, one last major area the book covers is the relationship with Saudi Arabia, which is complicated, to say the least.
Extremely complicated. And contradictory.
You have these long-standing ties between the bin Laden family, Osama's family, and the Saudi royals, the Al Saud.
Yeah, the bin Laden construction company was huge, built palaces, mosques, very close to the regime for decades.
Atwan even mentions King Faisal telling the bin Laden kids after their father died that he'd be like a father to them.
So, a deep connection. But then it soured dramatically with Osama. Why?
Primarily the presence of U.S. troops on Saudi soil after the First Gulf War. Bin Laden saw this as the Holy Land being occupied, the kingdom becoming an American protectorate.
And he also targeted the regime's legitimacy.
Yeah, accusing them of corruption, of failing to properly implement Islamic law, Sharia.
Which highlights this internal struggle within Saudi Arabia itself, doesn't it?
How do you mean?
Well, the state promotes and funds this very strict Wahhabi form of Islam through its education system.
Right.
Which, ironically, produced many of the very jihadis, including bin Laden, who then turned against the regime.
That's a deep contradiction.
And you add in high youth unemployment, a lack of other perspectives. It creates fertile ground for radical ideas, even against the state that fostered the initial ideology.
So after 9/11, Al-Qaeda started attacking inside Saudi Arabia itself.
Yes, that was a major shift. Bombing housing compounds for foreign workers in Riyadh in 2003.
Which actually killed many Saudis and other Muslims.
Right.
Doesn't that backfire initially?
It did, yeah. It hurt their popularity because Saudis weren't used to that kind of internal violence, especially against civilians. Later, they seemed to shift towards hard targets, like attacking the U.S. consulate in Jeddah.
And the source mentioned something surprising, that some Saudi security forces actually sympathized with bin Laden.
That's another layer of complexity. It suggests the dissent wasn't just among civilians.
And maybe the regime's own secrecy made things worse.
That's the argument. The culture of secrecy designed to control dissent might have actually made it harder for them to spot and root out internal threats like Al-Qaeda cells, because everything was already hidden.
It really makes you think, for you listening, how the internal dynamics within a key ally can create such problems. What are the real implications of these kinds of alliances?
It's a tough question with no easy answers.
So looking back at this deep dive into Atwan's secret history, we've covered a lot of ground. From bin Laden's surprisingly primitive life in Tora Bora.
To the complex mix of ideas, Azam, Qutbi, Zawahiri, that formed Al-Qaeda's ideology.
We looked at the difficult subject of martyrdom operations, challenging those stereotypes about who gets involved and the rise of female martyrs.
And Al-Qaeda's strategic shifts becoming decentralized, more resilient.
Plus that historical irony of the Iraq War acting as this huge unintended boost for them.
Right, turning it into a training ground, and then we saw their use of modern tools. Cyber-jihad, economic warfare.
And finally, that tangled, contradictory relationship with Saudi Arabia.
It paints a picture of a constantly adapting, ideologically driven movement that proved incredibly difficult to counter.
Which leads to a final thought. The source, Atwan's book, strongly suggests the U.S. presence in Iraq was this perfect storm for Al-Qaeda, providing recruits, weapons, money, training, and crucially, a narrative of resisting occupation that resonated widely.
A narrative that framed U.S. intervention as oppression.
Exactly. So the provocative question Atwan leaves us with, implicitly, is about future strategy. If military intervention inadvertently strengthened the enemy,
Should the focus shift? Maybe towards addressing the root causes, the political grievances, the social crises in the Muslim world that fuel this kind of extremism.
instead of focusing solely on, say, taking out leaders or military campaigns? It's a challenging thought, isn't it?
It is. It forces us to consider the complexities, the unintended consequences, and maybe the need for different approaches entirely.
And it reminds us how crucial it is to try and understand the information coming out of these conflicts and the motivations involved, even when they seem completely alien.